Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on CEE insurance matters. Thank you for taking the time out from your busy jobs to listen to us today. I'm hoping that we will have an interesting presentation from our three speakers, and you will walk away from today with something new learned and maybe some new questions. We have three jurisdictions covered today. These are Hungary, Russia and the Ukraine. In Hungary, we will hear about the sanctions regime applicable to insurance, and my colleague István Poszkai will be talking about that. In Russia, we will hear from Leonid on the requirements to set up and operate branches of foreign insurers in Russia. And in the Ukraine, Ihor Alekov will talk about the novelties in the new law on insurance. Our speakers today are István Poszkai from CMS Hungary, Leonid Zubarev from CMS Russia, and Ihor Olekov from CMS Ukraine. I myself am the head of the CEE insurance practice. My job today will be more to help and change slides rather than anything else. But I do hope to see you all in maybe yet another webinar later this year, as there are interesting developments on the insurance market also in Romania, and we will be organizing a webinar about that as well. Moving on. We will start with Hungary. And first, I would like to say a couple of words about our speaker today. István will kick off the presentation with the Hungarian news. He is a counsel in the insurance group in CMS Budapest. He has over 25 years of experience in the insurance industry, many of which were spent in on-hands and in-house positions in Hungarian subsidiaries of two global insurance and pensions companies. So István, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Christina. Good morning, everyone. Would you please move for the first slide? The insurance players, whether insurers or intermediaries, are operating in a highly regulated industry. Whatever they do, they must consider the applicable legislation, the regulatory expectations, and the potential risk at all times. In Hungary, the Financial Supervisory Authority is the national bank with strong supervisory power over the industry. For the regulated entities, it is crucial to have a good understanding of the behavior and protocols of their supervisor. Generally speaking, we may characterize the local regulator as a fair but demanding authority. The regulator is not a friend and not an enemy. It's better to treat them as a serious business partner with the mission to enforce the legally compliant conduct for all entities. It is also evident, like any other jurisdictions, that the regulator penalizes non-compliance. Under the sanction regime, they apply a great variety of disciplinary actions, from the very soft one to the catastrophic resolution. The outcome depends on several factors, but the entity's track record is always an important concern. If the entity considered as a good corporate citizen with strong collaboration attitude, then the applied sanction would be even much more moderate. From overall perspective, the regulatory protocols can be classified into three main types of control proceedings. Prudential regime, this is for locally licensed subsidiaries. General good regime, this is for all either locally licensed or a branch or a cross-border provider. And AML-CTF regime, which is also applicable for all the entities. In the course of exercising the supervisory and controlling function, the HNB applies several legal instruments to regulate the market. The primary legal source is the Insurance Act in Hungary, which incorporates all local requirements and EU legal legislation and practically serves as a legal Bible for both the assertive and the industrial players. As supplementary legal instruments, several government and ministerial decrees play an important role in the insurance business. Those usually provide a more detailed regulation to some specific issues which are not elaborated by the insurance code. The regulatory guidelines and recommendations also appear to be important orientations. Some of them address very specific questions and explain the respective regulatory position. Some others provide more general guidance, impacting different areas of the business activity. On a frequent basis, I receive a question whether those guidelines are legally binding or not. My answer is that formally these are not binding, but it is highly recommended to comply with them, since the HNB attach importance to respective compliance. Next slide, please. For the insurance business in Hungary, we have two pillars of the sanction regime, the Insurance Act and the HNB Act. First, the Insurance Act outlines the type of sanctions that can be imposed against non-compliant entities. Second, the HNB Act provides a detailed sanction regime by disclosing the financial thresholds, which range from a couple of 10,000 Hungarian forints up to 2 billion forints. The basis of such sanctions or fine can be either a regular examination or a mandatory filing of corporate reports from which the HNB receives sufficient information to discover the actual non-compliance. For branches and cross-border providers, the prudential control does not apply, but they are exposed to the extensive consumer protection, which represent a priority function of the local regulator. Unlike certain other industries, the down rate is not common in the insurance business in Hungary. From the past 20 or 25 years, I may recall just a couple of cases when HNB conducted such a type extreme inspection with a very good reason, as it turned out later to the public. Next slide, please. The disciplinary actions and fines represent, like I said before, a great variety, and the actual sanction always aligns with the actual breach. The Insurance Act provides an accurate list of those actions which are to be made to respond a discovered breach. This list begins with a simple warning notice and ends with a full closure of the business, along with a very high personal and corporate fines. An isolated breach without material damage would likely trigger a low or moderate fine. However, a mass breach impacting a bigger number of customers should appear to be a system deficiency and would trigger much higher fines and need for an action plan to be implemented. The type of sanctions can be divided into three categories as seen on the slide. When imposing of them, the HNB takes into account and carefully evaluate all relevant circumstances. At the end, the HNB releases a resolution with detailed reasoning and also impose a fine. The entity must publish the merit of the resolution on the website for 5 consecutive years. Next slide, please. And the next one, please. I was too fast now, please. Thank you. By default, the AML-CTF regulations are not industry-specific concerns, but applicable to almost every business operations. However, insurers are obviously much more exposed. Accordingly, the insurers and insurance brokers must have appropriate AML-CTF policies and procedures in place and should focus on the efficient control mechanism. Hungary has a quite robust AML-CTF regulations, which are amended time to time in accordance with the actual AML directive. The local regulator is particularly sensitive to this area of operation and tends to impose even higher amounts of fines if the regulated entity fails to identify the clients or delays to report the suspicious transactions. The AML-CTF is a field of operation where a relatively small mistake may generate a really big problem, even if the entity under control is otherwise a transparent and good corporate citizen. Finally, let me tell you a couple of words about recent novelties of the insurance regulation in Hungary. The mandatory publication of claims handling is evidently the most important change which affects all non-life insurers. The life companies are only impacted if they sell accident and health products. Until June this year, the claims handling was not regulated at all, and the insurers established their own rules in line with the industry standards. Now the situation has been changed significantly. Going forward, the insurers must disclose and publish on the internet the main features of their claims handling procedures and must comply with mandatory response time, which is 15 or 30 days from the receipt of the claim. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, István, for that very interesting presentation. We will now move on to Russia. But before I do, just a quick word to everybody. If, as you have listened to our presentations, you have questions, please do feel free to put them in the chat box and we will try to respond at the end. We have reserved 10 minutes or so for the questions and answer section. All right, and now moving on to Russia. And Leonid, who will be walking us through the benefits of opening a branch of foreign insurers in Russia. Just a couple of words about Leonid. He's a senior partner and the head of our insurance practice group in CMS Moscow. He is a certified expert for insurance disputes with the Russian Arbitration Center, and he has advised many Russian and international insurers and reinsurers on new product development, market entry, and exit strategies. He also has a wealth of experience in complex claims handling and is a seasoned litigator. Over to you, Leonid. Apologies for that. We seem to be experiencing some technical troubles. We had some earlier this morning as well. I would suggest we move on to the Ukraine and give Leonid the chance to come back up. So Ihor, if you would please take the floor, that would be great. Let me just move the slides.
Thank you, Christina. I will start to speak about Ukraine, a few words about what we see happening in the Ukrainian insurance market. First of all, I want to ask everyone who is participating, if you have any questions, please do ask us questions, because in Ukraine we are experiencing very significant changes in the insurance area. So I have only limited time to cover the basic picture, but if you have very specific questions, you are welcome to ask those questions, and I will be pleased to respond either during our webinar or after the webinar. I will contact each individual who asked the questions. So what we have in Ukraine? In Ukraine, the last law on insurance was adopted 25 years ago and still operates and still is in place. So we have a very ambitious plan to change the whole regulation of insurance industry. And this has started in 2020 when the law was adopted to actually create new regulator for insurance industry, and this was called split in Ukraine. Split because the old regulator, the National Commission on Regulation of Financial Markets, it was reorganized into the National Bank of Ukraine and the Securities Commission. And now, starting from 1st of July 2020, the supervision and regulation of insurance industry is under the National Bank of Ukraine, which is the principal regulator for the insurance market. The National Bank of Ukraine, unlike the previous regulator, is very active and actually put the insurance industry in the list of its priorities to develop, because they understand that this is a new market which needs to change. Can I ask Christina to shift to the next slide so we move on based on the presentation? So as you see, the statistics of the market is that financial companies, they are in the overall picture of regulated financial businesses, they take, I would say, the largest share, while the insurers are really not significant in terms of the business of insurance industry. Christina, I think you are shifting too quickly the slides, so we have to go back basically to the previous slide. So what has happened since National Bank of Ukraine overtook the regulation of insurance industry is that the number of insurance companies has drastically reduced from 300 insurance companies which we had in 2019. We now have only 169 insurance companies, which is kind of very significant decrease from the time when the National Bank of Ukraine took over the supervisory function over the insurance industry, and we expect this trend to continue because the requirements which are imposed on the insurers these days by the National Bank, they are becoming stricter each day. And unfortunately, this results in the reduction of the number of companies. But quality-wise, I would say that the situation is improving because the remaining players in the market, they remain the stronger ones. and real insurance companies, unlike the previous practices where you had some untransparent players in the market which were, not very, I would say, treating customers well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the business of insurance, I will not stop in detail, but you will see that non-life risk insurance is the principal business which is covering most of the liabilities which the insurers are insuring in Ukraine, with, of course, motor car insurance taking the lead, and there are some other types of insurance which continue to develop, like health insurance and property and fire risk insurance. These are the main sectors in which insurance industry is developing. So next slide, please, Christina. So in terms of the expectations on the regulatory front, the National Bank, as the new regulator, immediately after it took over the regulatory function, declared that they will basically change the rules for the insurance market. And this has resulted in the preparation of the draft law on insurance, the new draft law, which will replace the old insurance law which we had for 25 years, and will introduce a new transparent model for the insurance industry. It will increase not only transparency of the insurance business itself, but will also impose liability on the owners, on the controllers of insurers, and will provide for many other new rules that will change the overall picture for the insurance market. Next slide, please. In particular, although there are some basic requirements will remain the same, like the solvency and minimum charter capital requirements, they are not substantially increased under this new draft legislation. The approach to licensing is going to change. So unlike previously, where the licenses were granted for each particular type of insurance, now the licenses will be granted for classes of insurance, with particular attention to very specific classes in which activities the insurers will be able to pursue. Importantly, also, the draft insurance law will provide for very rigorous powers of the regulator to control transparency of the ownership structure of the insurer. And this is something that has already started even before the draft law is adopted, and the insurance industry is now requested to disclose their ownership structures. But under the new draft law, the NBU will take over more active role in finding out who the ultimate beneficial owners of the shareholders of insurance industry, and they effectively, the draft law effectively copies the same system which existed for commercial banks in Ukraine, in which each owner of substantial shareholding, about 10% of interest in insurer, would have to disclose their beneficial ownership to the NBU, and each next trigger would be 25, 50, 75% shareholding in the insurer, which will need to be disclosed on a regular basis, including any changes in the shareholding structure if it's more sophisticated than one level. Each change in the shareholding structure would also need to be notified and agreed upon with the regulator. This is quite important because, as we have seen with the banks and with other participants in the financial services markets, many players, especially international players, they do not actually notice that very often they need to do the filing with the regulator because of some changes in their shareholding structure. And this is something that we recommend to do even before this draft law is adopted, because in many respects, disclosure of ownership structure, it takes a lot of effort, and the liability for its violation could be drastic. So under the draft insurance law, basically this may lead even to liquidation of the insurance company if the ownership structure is not appropriately disclosed. So the other novelties which exist, which will be in the draft insurance law, are of course quite numerous. This relates to disclosure requirements to insurance products, to registration of brokers and other intermediaries. So these are comprehensive changes which will be introduced. So if anyone has any questions or issues regarding this, we will be pleased to provide more detailed information. So I will not stop in detail on this, because, as I say, this will simply change quite a lot of different procedures and rules, and obviously we do not have enough time to spend on this. A few more issues which I want to mention regarding this relate to the fact that even if under the existing rules we did not have very detailed withdrawal procedures of insurance from the market, under the draft insurance law those procedures will be introduced, and this can be either voluntary or non-voluntary procedure, but this also needs to be taken into account because the powers of the regulator are increased, and obviously the regulator will emphasize the process actually, and how this should be done in each particular case. Next slide, please. Also, in the meantime, apart from these regulatory changes, we see in the market quite active development of insurtech businesses, and these are not only startup but also companies, but also some existing players are adopting new products together with insurtech businesses, which relate not only to remote entering into insurance contracts, but also short-term contracts for insurance of various types. We also see quite active interest in using AI and artificial intelligence for analyzing customer data and for risk assessment and other opportunities. These areas have started to develop in insurance quite actively, and because the new regulator is very open to these ideas, we expect that once this draft law on insurance is adopted, the NBU would be very willing to review any new business model or improvement of business model of existing insurance companies in Ukraine. And they have declared publicly that regulatory sandboxes will be introduced for any novelties in banking, in insurance, and other similar areas. Next slide, please. And also, of particular importance for Ukraine, at the moment we have reform of our health industry, and medical insurance, health insurance is one of the topics which is very widely discussed. We have participated in the working group to develop changes to the existing tax legislation relating to tax exemptions for health insurance, and this will be voted hopefully very soon by Ukrainian parliament. So health insurance is going to be the next, I would say, big thing in insurance market in Ukraine after adoption of these changes, and we expect that actually significant number of insurance companies will start to offer medical insurance, health insurance in Ukraine. As I say, if anyone has any questions or comments, I will be very much pleased to respond. And now I pass the floor to Leonid to cover Russia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ihor. And I'm sorry, I had some difficulties with my mic, but now everything is working. And to start with, I think I just have to say that Russia is going through some changes in the insurance market as well. And there are things that I would love to talk about, but they mainly concern sort of internal things. Today, I'd like to talk about things that may affect international players, and that is the new regulations on opening branches of foreign insurers in Russia. The issue first came about in 2012 when the protocol on accession to the WTO was signed, and in this protocol, Russia took an obligation to open the insurance market for branches of foreign insurers from 22nd August of 2021. So the law on branches came into force on this particular date, and I will briefly discuss its main provisions and conditions for opening branches of foreign insurers in Russia. Next slide, please. So there are several conditions that must be met when insurer wants to open a branch. Accreditation and licensing of the branches is performed by the Central Bank of Russia. Central Bank of Russia is it's a mega regulator which regulates all financial markets, including insurance. It's responsible for issuing licenses and also will be responsible for accreditation, so registration of branches of foreign insurers. Foreign insurers may be engaged in voluntary life and personal insurance, voluntary property insurance, and compulsory motor third-party liability insurance. So other areas of compulsory insurance will not be opened to branches of foreign insurers. One of the conditions that will not depend on the foreign insurer is the existence of an agreement between the Central Bank of Russia and the national regulator of the country of the foreign insurer's residence on information exchange. As of today, the Central Bank of Russia does have such agreements with a number of national regulators, but not with all of them. So it is important for any foreign insurer who wish to open a branch to check whether such agreement exists, because this is one of the prerequisites. And another prerequisite is once the branch is opened, it must apply and take membership in the self-regulatory body of the Russian insurance industry. It's so-called All Russian Union of Insurers, and foreign insurers will have to pay some membership fees to be the members. Next slide, please. There are certain conditions for which company can open a branch, and insurers from offshore zones or those insurers who are controlled by persons residing in offshore zones will not be allowed to open branches in Russia. And the list of these offshore zones is basically developed by the Ministry of Finance of Russia, and all of the low tax zones that are in the list of OECD will be allowed, but those who are not will not be allowed to open branch in Russia. Another prerequisite for the mother company is that it has to be engaged in 8 years in life insurance or 5 years in non-life insurance in its home jurisdiction. It must also have experience in providing insurance services through branches in other countries for 5 years. It has to possess assets of not less than $5 billion. And the branch has to have IT infrastructure, meaning basically servers, on the Russian soil, where it will have to keep all information related to its Russian operations. And internal controls and audit of the branch will have to be done in accordance with Russian law. To open a branch, foreign insurer will have to deposit a security deposit with a government agency. Depending on the type of insurance, the amount of deposit varies from $4.1 million to 8.2. And local management of the Russian branch will have to have necessary qualifications, and these qualifications include education in finance or economics, relevant experience of not less 2 years, and lots of other, I have to say. Some reputational and background checks will be done on all managers, but they can be foreign nationals, in which case their education certificates will have to be recognized in Russia. And another condition that will apply to these branches is that they will have to cede up to 10% of the risks underwritten in Russia to a national reinsurance company that was set up in 2015 in Russia after certain sanctions were introduced against certain Russian companies, and reinsurance became impossible for them in the Western markets. So this national reinsurance company will also reinsure up to 10% of all risks underwritten by a branch of a foreign insurer. Next slide, please. So we have covered very briefly the Russian regulations on new branches. Today, no branch has been opened yet. It remains to be seen how the regulations will be applied in practice. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on this, or indeed any other topic related to Russian insurance market or Russia in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonid, so much for that. And actually, since you were speaking of questions, we do have a question from the audience from you. The question is, in your opinion, which setup is the best between a branch and a subsidiary? If you could take that up, that would be great.
Okay, thanks. That's a very interesting question. I think it's difficult to answer definitively because, as I said, no branches have been opened yet now. But I think the branch may be easier for certain insurers who do not want to extend their corporate structures, and they are more used to working through branches. Subsidiaries are more sort of tested soil, and it is more predictable in a sense to have a subsidiary rather than a branch. Financially, it certainly is almost the same. Branches and subsidiaries must have similar sort of financial solvency requirements. Branches have this minimum deposit, subsidiaries have minimum charter capital. So from that perspective is the same. But I think from the point of view of certainty, as of today, subsidiary is still probably more advisable. But while time progresses, I think we'll see first examples of branches being opened up, and we'll see how these new regulations apply, and maybe my opinion will change with the passage of time.
Thank you, Leonid. All right, well then, we also seem to have a question for Hungary, and the question, István, is: do the different regulators communicate between each other? And in other words, can an investigation by one regulator trigger the investigation of the financial regulator in Hungary?
Thank you. Well, in fact, nothing prevents the regulators to communicate with each other, and most likely they do. Actually, we have limited information about their communication protocol. The relevance for us, whether a certain type of investigation would disclose material information to the financial regulator, which, on the basis of this information received, would trigger and conduct an examination. According to my personal experience, this is not really usual in Hungary. For instance, the tax agency does not report the tax deficiency to the national bank. Where I see a real danger is the procedure of the competition office. specifically when they act in their consumer protection capacity. During their comprehensive preparation and investigation process, this competition office always contacts the relevant regulator of the specific industry under control, under investigation, exchange information, and finally share sometimes a huge amount of information they change, and finally share the findings of such an inspections. This, I guess, and I'm quite sure that this would easily trigger a financial examination later in time by the financial regulator, the HND. Yes.
Thank you, Istvan. And we have a question also for Ihor. The question is, what are the main distribution channels in the Ukraine?
Thank you, Christina. In Ukraine, traditionally, it depends, of course, on the type of insurance, but traditionally, the regional offices were very strong in distributing certain types of insurance, like motor and car insurance. These days, this is starting to change because we see more online products which are offered by insurance industry, and I think the number of online services and online offerings by insurance companies is increasing drastically. And obviously, COVID situation has changed the approach of people to how they actually communicate with the insurance business and with the insurance industry as such. So I expect that this trend will continue, although for some types of insurance, like the motor and car insurance, regional offices are still driving in the driving seat.
All right, thank you so much, Ihor. I think that wraps up our webinar for today. I am aware of the fact that we're slightly overrun. There are a couple of questions still in the chat. Our colleagues will pick this up and try to respond to each one of you separately. So if you have any questions, you have our contact details on this last slide, and you will also receive the recording of the session, or a link to the recording of the session. And with that, thank you again for joining us today. We hope it's been an informative session, and we hope to see you again in our next CEE insurance webinars. Have a great day, everybody, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.